Hi guys, welcome to today's episode. Let's talk more about Qigong. All right, so first one's from Honest Tai Chi. Cool name. All right, Honest Tai Chi. In our lineage, yin and yang is, as my teacher put, is 95% of the practice. Last 5% is the five element theory and linkage, usually with the psychological stuff. We use this same view with helping people with lifestyle changes. Have you had similar experience, Adam? Mostly yin and yang, less five element, or vice versa? Thanks for sharing, Adam. Always quality stuff. Thanks for the comment. It's very nice. When it comes to helping people change their lifestyle, I don't really think of it as yin and yang, but I guess you could say it is. In original Taoism, there's a line, for example, in the Nei Yi, which is the oldest scripture in Taoism. It says, can you take counsel from it? And it was talking about the Qi, also referred to as the Tao, also referred to as the Da in the Nei Yi. So the terms internal power, virtue, wisdom, and Tao, and Qi, these terms were used interchangeably. Although they were more precise later in history, but in the Nei Yi, they were used interchangeably. And it says right in there, can you take counsel from the stuff directly? So you can say it kind of resembles where the ancestor of Taoism, which is Shang Dynasty, Wu shamans, right? With the idea that it's the same as the shamanistic practice across the world, which is you literally take counsel from it, right? Rather it's rituals or psychedelics or prayer, you would get advice or you would get counsel from the stuff itself. Later in when shamanism became Taoism in the Zhou dynasty, in the original Taoism of non-doing, which is outlined in Yi, that important line people usually overlook, and that is, can you take counsel from it? Later, when I learned Heaven Mountain Qigong, which is basically the lineage of original Taoism due to its practice paradigm, one of the main precepts in it is, let the Qi teach you. And that saying's been used when I was talking to Steve, if you're watching, a lot about taking counsel from it, right? And this is very important because if you look at modern Chinese culture, when people are trying to make an important decision, usually they do what everyone else does using the left side of the brain, which is you gather a lot of data, you weight the pros and cons of something, and you see what you should do. And that's what most people do when we have to make an important decision, right? We use our most powerful computer or intellect. We gather as much data as we can. We gather the plus and minuses, and then we go and make a decision. Whenever that fails and we're still stuck and we can't make an intelligent decision, usually we use the other side of the brain, the more intuitive side or the more creative side, more gut feeling, goes by many names, right? The sensing part of the brain, or you can call it the intuitive side, the artistic side. Depending on the culture, you give it different names. It's like in the West, that would be like most of the people that are gifted with that, we call them artists or poets or painters. And if you study the evolution behavior or the creative process of most artists, a lot of times the phenomenon that's reported is they always say that I don't feel like I wrote that poem or I paint that picture. I don't feel like I did it. Instead, I feel like I was a vessel and the stuff came in and I was just an instrument. So in the West, a lot of top artists will report that feeling. That's why the father of psychology, one of them, Carl Jung, was said that people don't have ideas. Ideas have people. To signify the idea that you're a vessel, right? But unfortunate for us, very less than 1% of the population are going to be gifted artists like those people. So what about normal people, right? People that are not gifted artists. In the East, like in China, they also report that you're a vessel, that the stuff comes in and moves you, just like the West, like the artists. But for the masses, for the normal people who are not gifted artists, they can still tap into that. And the way they do that is a practice that's very common in China, from from the time before it was China to the present day China itself in all cultures, and that is the I Ching, which is a very important book in China. It's the oldest book in China, and it predates Chinese civilization. It came from the Wu shaman, the tribal people, before they called themselves Chinese, during the Yellow River area, right? The Yi Jing, or the Zhou Yi is called, because it's found in the inheritors of it was in the early Zhou dynasty. And most people know what the I Ching is. Basically, if you go to a Chinese Taoist temple, they'll get a bamboo container and there's straws in it, and you shake it. And then when you shake it, a number will come out. Like maybe you get number 3 or you get number 20. And then when it falls on the ground, you pick it up, number 3, number 20. You go to the Taoist priest and you let them know. You go, hey, I got a number 3 and I got a number 30. And then the priest will look at it and look it up in the numbers. 3 will tell a certain mystical story. And 30 would tell a certain mystical story. There's 64 trigrams from the Bagua, and each one tells a different story. So when you shake this stuff based on luck, you get a number, and then the priest will read you that story. And that mythological story has something to do with the question you have in your mind of the event. And that's supposed to give you guidance of your intuition based on the idea that you're a vessel, the stuff is coming down to talk to you. So that would be an example of fortune telling, or the I Ching, that is trying to tap into the part of the brain that's the same as what the artist has reported. I'm going to go a long way to talk about this to try to show you that it doesn't matter if it's East or West. When people feel that phenomena, they're trying to have a medium to tap into it. In the case of the West, it's usually reported by really gifted artists. And in the case of the East, the common people would use the I Ching. But the idea of shaking the stuff and letting the numbers come out and going to get the priest to read it, what usually precedes that is usually kneeling down, worshiping, and praying to the stuff. And then so when you shake the stuff is supposed to come down and give you the omen or give you the oracle or whatever number you're supposed to get. From the original Taoist point of view, and also from a shamanistic point of view, that type of practice is really for people with no connection or Wi-Fi. So they need to use the tool of shaking the stuff and then getting the number and getting the priest or the shaman to read what number you get and give you the story so you can relate it to the side of the brain which correspond to the event that you're asking about. I hope I'm making sense right now for those that doesn't follow the I Ching. But from a Qigong point of view, or during that era, it wasn't even called Qigong at that point. In the Neiyi period, in the Zhou dynasty, it was called Taoism, right? The idea is that if you practice meditation a lot, you directly have a connection to the stuff above. And therefore, you wouldn't need any fortune telling technique. You wouldn't need any philosophy. You wouldn't need any I Ching to know or have to shake the stuff to know what number you get. You automatically, intuitively, because you're connected, you automatically can receive guidance. Or as the Neiyi scripture will say, can you take counsel from the stuff? Can you take counsel from the Qi? So everything I said is just to explain that one line in the scripture. Can you take counsel from the stuff? So when you practice the Qigong, and if you pass the first container to the second, from the second center to the third, from the third to the top, from the top to the merging process, when it comes back down into shape, you would get an answer based on the question you asked to take counsel from it, right? Or from a Hinduism point of view, they will call it the Akasha records. Or even like in Hermetics, sometimes they talk about it, where you're getting guidance from the quantum computer above based on your connection to it. Or from a Christian point of view, they'll say you're praying to God to get an answer. So it's the same idea, the idea of connecting to the above and getting an answer below. Sometimes people get offended by that kind of mystical or shamanistic feeling. So if you use a psychological way of talking about it, I already did from an artistic point of view, where the painter or the writer will get the feeling that they're a vessel. And Carl Jung, a psychologist, will say people don't have ideas have people. So now you can see it doesn't matter if we look at it from a more medieval Christian point of view or ancient shamanistic point of view or modern psychology point of view. They all offer different explanation, but one thing is true, and that is whenever human beings have the idea, or no, not the idea, have the feeling they can't shake off that something, that they're a vessel and something is giving them an answer through a connection, usually received as intuition or a gut feeling, it becomes a very useful thing. Besides the fact that beautiful art is the result that they're creating, or the ability to receive an answer to a question they can't solve. So this becomes a very useful tool, although the explanation can be different depending on the culture. The fact that it is very useful, the remaining question that is important is how do you tap into it? So for people that has no power, they will use the I Ching, the oracle and shaking that I talk about. For people with more power, claims such as in qigong or in Taoism that if you have connection, this, you can take counsel from it. So, and then from a more shamanistic point of view, sometimes they use psychedelics. So there's different ways to tap into it. And the reason why I'm listing this is because sometimes a culture will claim they have the only way. That's not true. Whether it's the artistic path in the West or the shamanistic path, sometimes with DMT or psychedelics, or with prayer in medieval Europe, or like in China where they use Qigong. Across the globe throughout history, people have tapped into this phenomena of being able to feel like they're a vessel and the stuff is giving them answer. If someone has the power to do that, then changing their lifestyle, as the original question of this podcast, becomes the same thing. You don't really use medical knowledge, yin and yang, or the five elements, to help someone change their lifestyle. So it's not like therapy, right? Instead, classically speaking, you would tap into the stuff either through your own power of meditation or not your power through psychedelics. In either way, when you get an answer of how to change your lifestyle, that's your answer. So it's not based on like the modern TCM where you're kind of using like five element or yin and yang idea. From strictly a Taoist point of view, if someone's doing original Taoism and they're tapping into the stuff, then the original Taoist scripture would say, can you take counsel from it? So can you actually have enough juice or power to open one center at a time to connect to the above? So when it comes down, you receive an answer. So you kind of type it into the Cosmetic Google and then you get an answer. And that's how you change your lifestyle. So Taoism originally was not a philosophy, and this is the reason why. They were all shamans and mystics. They didn't philosophize about how they should live their life. Instead, they received counsel from the Tao itself. So your second question is it yin and yang? Well, when it comes down, the answer sometimes is yin, like water, something really soft, what Taoism is famous for. Sometimes really yang, like fire, like really hard, which exists in Taoism, of course, but it's not usually talked about. So what classic you use to help you? Let's say you receive a yin answer and you want to amplify yin. Well, the Tao Te Ching would be a really good book to help you because Lao Tzu Tao Te Ching, everybody knows, is the most yin scripture that has ever existed. It also happens to be the second most translated book in human history besides the Bible, right? If you connect to above and when it comes down as a yang kind of feeling, then one of the Taoist classic that cannot be more yang, is the maximum yang you get would be Sun Tzu, The Art of War. So as you can see, if you look at the ancient classics of Taoism, rather Sun Tzu, The Art of War, Lao Tzu, Tao Te Ching, Chen Tzu, or like Lei Tzu or Nei Yi, what scripture you use really depends on it, if what it comes down, does it tell you is going to go yin or does it go yang? So you don't just read the scripture discriminately. That's why the I Ching is important, but more important, without using the I Ching, just connecting and getting the answer by itself. By doing that, that's how classically Taoism would change your lifestyle. So that's really important, right? Because a lot of time, people mistaken Taoism as philosophy or confuse it with Chinese medicine. And both of those are really modern interpretation of Taoism. If you look back to Zhou Dynasty, it wasn't like that. It was way more direct. For those that are not just intellectualizing about this, but actually practicing to the point where this is happening, and of all the Qigong masters that I met or study with or heard about, maybe only the top 5% are doing this kind of work all the time. Doesn't make them better. It just means they're specializing in a certain aspect. Usually their system is before the communist era is an ancient practice that includes this kind of work where you're actively taking guidance or getting connection or getting answers from that part of the brain through the connection. Whenever that happens, that's uncommon, of course, because in the West, it only happens to artists most of the time when it's reported. Not all the time, but most of the time. Whenever someone's getting to that point where they can do that, whether it's just psychedelics, meditation, or prayer. Now, majority of the population don't make decisions like that. Normal people gather data and weigh pros and cons, which takes an enormous amount of time. It's slow. Whereas the intuitive process that we've been talking about so far is instantaneous. You don't know why you know the answer. It's a gut feeling. You just know the answer. So whenever this happens and you get this kind of habit or power through practice, it is important in the beginning process, the first few years, to do what normal people do. So let's say you connect to above through prayer or psychedelics. You ask it a question, you get an answer. It's instantaneous. To check if that's realistic or to check if that is good, do what normal people do. Take the exact same problem, take days or hours or months to collect a bunch of data, weight the pros and cons, find out what the right answer is. Probably about 90% of the time, if you're truly connecting to above, the answer is the same. To give you a reality check to know you're not bullshitting yourself, right? So in the beginning process, that's how you're dialed in to know if you're truly connecting or if you're just imagining. So for students very few students do that, right? Most of the time when people come to the Taoist community so far, since I've been teaching, they're mostly interested in health. But there are people, I would say about probably 5% of students, who are interested in using Taoism in daily life in terms of, flow like water or all the famous Taoist metaphors and philosophies and principles. They want to better their life and live with Taoist ideas. So whenever that happens, it's only going to be manifest through sitting. Very few people are going to get there with moving and standing because it wasn't designed for that. Because standing is mostly about this center, whereas sitting is about the spiritual centers, the heart and the head, merging into the sky. So that's what sitting is. So when people are interested in using Taoism for daily life from a classical, original Taoist point of view, then sitting is what I usually recommend them to do. And once they kind of dissolve and connect, then they start kind of playing with the idea of throwing it up and getting answers back down, like a quantum computer, like using a digital I Ching, like being the poet and the artist where they feel like they're a vessel connecting and the stuff's moving them. All this stuff reported in history. Sometimes, and this is really cool, when students actually get dedicated enough to play with it to the point where they message me and say, hey, lately it's been working out, right? Whenever I feel like there's a problem I can't solve, I open up and use my intuition. And that sounds fine if you say that. But if you get to the technical side of it, what do you mean by using your intuition? And then, of course, as a Taoist, we're actually opening up the center, connecting, and getting a quantum answers, right? You usually don't say that to people because they think you're nuts because they don't practice. So they can't feel it. And because they can't feel it, it becomes talk. And whenever it becomes talk, it enters into the domain of debate and belief system. But for those students that actually practice and actually feel it, they go, man, this works really good. I'm getting answers instantaneously. I'm able to use and for the first time in my life, tap into my intuition. Whenever that happens, I always tell them to check it with their old habits before they began Taoism years ago. And that is do what normal people do, gather data, weight the pros and cons, come up with an answer. Because I want them for their first few years to see if the answers match. If it does, at least 80% of the time, then they can practice dialing in their Wi-Fi so they can even sharpen their intuition even more. Aside from that fact, it also teaches them when they verify with pros and cons and collecting data, it also teaches them how to tell a difference between intuition versus imagination. And it also teaches them to trust intuition once their decisions and their answers are being verified over and over again. So anyways, I hope I didn't, confuse you, and that's not my intention, but this is one of the hardest aspects of Taoism I'm going to talk about, because Unless someone practices original Taoism, is actually not very common. The I Ching's common, philosophy is common, Qi Gong's common, but this actual original shamanistic part is usually hard to talk about, right? So if you guys have any more questions, please leave it below. And also, I want to say, I'm always forgetting to say stuff, so I'm starting to write it down. Next class, we're going to be working on the standing pose training. Last few classes was about sitting, and we're going to be working a little bit on bone breathing as well as pore breathing and how to connect it to the tree shaking exercises from each one. And also be doing some sitting soon because the flu season's coming up, and that kind of practice is really good for the flu. Okay. And also going over the features of the Taoist community. Some of you have never watched my podcast and you're asking what is the Taoist community. Basically, I teach a live stream class of guided meditation of qigong, lying down, sitting, standing, moving, and walking from original Taoism. I do that once a week, and the other half of class is live Q&A. It comes with a lot of perks like free once a month free 1 hour Q&A. It also comes with personal coaching. It comes with a student library of all classes, so if you miss a live class, you don't have to worry about it. It comes with a live student forum and a bunch of stuff you can read about. So follow the links below in the description. Hope to see you there. See you next time.